The sound of shattering glass shattered the uneasy silence. "How dare you, Elise?" I spat, glaring at my sister-in-law. The fragments of the wine glass lay scattered on the hardwood floor, red liquid seeping into the grain. Elise's eyes widened in mock innocence. "Marla, I didn't mean to upset you." She glanced around the room, playing to the captive audience of our family members. "I was only teasing about you living off Derek's success." Derek shifted uncomfortably in his seat, Taft unwilling to get between us. My father, Harold, leaned forward, his weathered face etched with concern. "Girls, please, can we not argue today?" "It's a family gathering," he said, voice strained. "Exactly," Elise purred, straightening the silk scarf draped over her designer outfit. "We're family. I was just making a little joke." I clenched my fists until my knuckles turned white. "Your jokes are never little, Elise. They're always thinly veiled insults meant to demean me." She laughed, a grating sound that made my skin crawl. "Demean you? Marla, you're delusional. I'm merely stating facts. If it weren't for Derek's success, you'd be living in a cardboard box." "Elise," Derek finally interjected, his face flushed, but I'd already heard enough. "Keep your money and your malice," I hissed, standing abruptly from my chair. "I'm done pretending we're one big happy family." Harold's eyes pleaded with me to stay, but I couldn't bear another moment under Elise's contemptuous gaze. I stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind me with a resounding thud. As I collapsed onto the guest bedroom bed, the muffled sounds of their bickering still reached my ears. Angry tears streamed down my face as I realized this family vacation was doomed from the start. How could we have let Elise's venom infect us like this? I stared at the suitcase I hadn't bothered unpacking, contemplating whether to start packing or wait for Harold to inevitably suggest we leave early, as he always did to keep the peace. A soft knock at the door interrupted my brooding. I wiped my eyes and called out, "Come in." Harold slipped inside, his expression pained. "I'm so sorry, dear. I think it's best if we cut our trip short this year. The tension is just too much." I nodded, my throat too tight with unshed tears to speak. As Harold moved to comfort me with a warm hug, I couldn't help but wonder how much longer we could go on like this. Something had to give, before Elise's entitlement and cruelty tore our family apart completely. The drive back from the ill-fated family gathering was tense and silent. Harold kept his eyes fixed on the road, his jaw set in a grim line. I stared out the passenger window, numb from the confrontation with Elise. As we finally pulled into the driveway of our modest suburban home, Harold let out a heavy sigh. "I'm so sorry you have to put up with her cruelty, dear." I shrugged, unable to find the words to express my hurt and frustration. Harold had apologized on Elise's behalf more times than I could count over the years. We entered the house, dropping our bags by the door. Harold immediately busied himself making tea, a nervous habit he'd developed since losing Mom to cancer 5 years ago. As I settled onto the living room couch, memories of my mother's final days came flooding back. Elise had visited exactly twice, both times leaving early with excuses about meetings or plans. Her indifference had stung. Harold brought me a steaming mug and took a seat across from me, wringing his hands. "I'm afraid Elise may have been right about one thing." He met my eyes, guilt etched into his features. "You have sacrificed so much for me since your mother passed. If it weren't for you, I raised a hand to stop him, shaking my head firmly. "Don't even think that, Dad. I stayed to care for you because I wanted to, not out of obligation. Mom would have done the same." His eyes glistened with tears as he reached out to grasp my hand. "You have always been the strong one, Marla, so much like your mother." Squeezing his hand in return, I pushed aside thoughts of Elise and her toxic behavior. This man was all that truly mattered to me now. Later that evening, as I prepared a simple dinner of roasted chicken and vegetables, the doorbell rang. I frowned, setting down my knife as Harold moved to answer it. "Derek? Elise? What are you doing here?" I heard Harold ask in surprise. "We felt just dreadful about how things ended today, Harold," came Elise's sickeningly sweet voice. "I wanted to come apologize in person and make amends with my dear sister-in-law." I bristled at her words, quickly drying my hands and moving to the front hall. Elise stood holding a large shopping bag, her bleached smile blindingly false. Derek hovered behind her, shifting uncomfortably. "There's no need for that," I said evenly, meeting Elise's gaze. I know exactly who and what you are. Nothing you say or do can change that. Elise's smile faltered before she regained her composure. Now, Marla, don't be so hostile. I come bearing gifts. She lifted the bag in offering. Rolling my eyes, I turned my back on her. You can take your gifts and your empty apologies and go. We want nothing more to do with you. Perhaps you could give us a moment, dear? Harold said in a placating tone. Before I could protest, he ushered Elise and a reluctant Derek into the living room, closing the door behind them. Fuming, I returned to the kitchen and the abandoned meal preparations. How dare she waltz in here with pretty words and wretched deception? I gripped the knife handle so tightly, my knuckles turned white, envisioning plunging it directly into Elise's cold black heart. No, I couldn't lose control like that. Mom had taught me to always take the high road, no matter how tempting vengeance might seem. But as the sounds of their hushed voices drifted through the closed door, I resolved that things could not continue this way. Elise's toxic negativity had cast its shadow over my life for far too long. One way or another, her hold over this family had to be broken, even if it meant extreme measures. A week after the disastrous family gathering, Harold insisted on hosting a dinner at our home for Elise. It's the only way to mend fences and move forward as a family, he had said. I reluctantly agreed, if only to show I was taking the high road. The evening started off civilly enough. Elise complimented the simple but tasteful table setting I had arranged, though I suspected her words were laced with condescension. Derek remained largely silent, his head bowed as if trying to make himself invisible. "This chicken is quite good," Elise said after a few bites, a hint of surprise in her tone. I merely nodded, keeping my focus on serving Harold seconds, though I do prefer mine with a bit more seasoning. My grip tightened on the serving spoon as I sensed a barb coming. "I like to let the natural flavors shine through," I replied evenly. Elise smirked, taking a pointed sip of her wine. "Of course, simple is best when on a budget, I suppose." Derek shifted in his seat, clearing his throat. "The meal is lovely, Marla. Thank you for having us." An awkward silence fell as I moved to clear Elise's empty plate. "Dessert, anyone?" I asked through gritted teeth. "Oh, I'd love something sweet," Elise gushed, patting her flat stomach. "Though I doubt you baked anything too decadent, we certainly wouldn't want me packing on any extra pounds before my next beach vacation." She let out a high-pitched giggle, as if we should all be in on the joke. Harold began to protest her rudeness, but I had reached my limit. "Tell me, Elise," I interrupted, slamming her plate down with a clatter. "Do you ever get tired of being such a vile, contemptuous witch?" Her eyes widened in mock offense. "I beg your pardon? Surely you're not referring to me." "Who else could I possibly mean?" I scoffed. "From the moment you married Derek, you've done nothing but insult me and belittle my life at every turn. I should have known you'd find a way to ruin even a simple family dinner." Now, Elise clucked, shaking her head. "Someone's awfully touchy tonight. I was only making a harmless little joke about rich food." "Your jokes are never harmless," I spat back. "They're always intended to remind me that without Derek's money, you see me as nothing but a penniless failure." Harold reached out pleadingly. "Marla, please calm down." But Elise just sneered, unable to resist twisting the knife. "Oh, stop being so sensitive! We all know the only reason you dote on dear old Dad is because you're hoping to be written into his will when he kicks the bucket." Her words hung in the air like a lead weight, stunning us all into silence. I stared at Elise, numb with fury, as tears sprang to Harold's eyes. Even Derek looked visibly shaken. In a split second, I made a decision I would never forget. Taking the plate still in my grasp, I flung it directly at Elise's smug face. It connected with a sickening crack, shattering into shards that peppered her designer dress and cut her flawless skin. Elise shrieked in pain and outrage, hands flying to her bloodied face as Derek leapt to her aid. Harold watched on in open-mouthed horror. Breathing hard, I loomed over them, seized with a dark calm. "Get out," I growled, pointing a shaking finger toward the door. "Get out of my house right now and never darken our doorstep again. Do you understand?" Elise continued to wail, muffled by Derek's jacket as he frantically bundled her toward the exit. Moments later, they were gone, the only sounds their retreating sobs and frenzied footfalls. Harold gaped at me. "Marla, what have you done?" I heard his voice crack. Sinking into the nearest chair, I buried my face in trembling hands. What had I done indeed? Tears rolled silently down my cheeks as I realized my path to vengeance had taken a dark, irrevocable turn. Against my better judgment, I agreed to accompany Harold and Derek on a family trip to a renowned national park a few weeks after the disastrous dinner incident. Harold had rationalized it as a chance to heal the fractures in our family. Deep down, I knew he just wanted to fulfill a promise to visit the park before his health further declined. The drive out was tense, with Derek breaking the silence only to make occasional small talk with Harold about park logistics. I stared stonily out the window, willing the miles to pass more quickly. Upon our arrival at the remote mountain lodge, Elise seemed to immediately sense the discord between us all. My, someone's got their grumpy pants on, she mocked with a saccharine smile as the valet unloaded our bags. I thought getting out in nature was supposed to lift one's spirits. Can we not do this here? Derek grumbled through gritted teeth. Elise merely pouted and looped her arm through his. I was just trying to lighten the mood, darling. Come, let's get unpacked and freshened up before dinner. She threw one last contemptuous look my way before sashaying off toward the lodge. I rolled my eyes and turned to help Harold with his suitcase, ignoring Derek's apologetic gaze. Dinner that evening set the tone for the days that followed. Elise couldn't resist taking petty jabs at everything from my modest attire to the healthy portions I encouraged Harold to eat. When she wasn't insulting me, she was monopolizing the conversations with endless chatter about the latest haute couture trends and reality TV gossip. It was as though she viewed the family vacation as an opportunity to assert her dominance over us all. One afternoon, as we set out on a short hiking trail, Elise hung back to walk beside me, ostensibly to admire the scenic views. After a few minutes of false pleasantries, her mask slipped. You know, I never expected you to actually come on this trip, she mused, eyeing me sidelong. I thought Derek might have more sense than to invite you along. I ground my teeth, refusing to give her the satisfaction of an emotional reaction. Why? Afraid my presence would spoil your little couple's retreat in paradise? She scoffed. Hardly. I just assumed you'd have more dignity than to keep hanging on like a barnacle, hoping to inherit Dad's estate or something? The memory of our dinner confrontation flooded back. I slowed my pace, clenching my fists. That's a disgusting assumption. Is it, though? She gave a derisive laugh. We both know you've dedicated your whole life to being Dad's caretaker. Isn't that why you've never had a real career? Or a serious relationship? Her words cut deep. I stopped walking, struggling to contain the fury building within me. At least I'm not a vapid, entitled gold digger like you, I spat. Elise raised a perfectly manicured eyebrow, wholly unaffected. Ooh, someone's showing their ugly side again. She moved in closer, her voice dropping to a menacing hiss. Listen here, Marla. The way I see it, you're just a sad, lonely burden that Dad and Derek are too weak to get rid of, but I'm not. So if I were you, I'd watch my back. Panic seized my chest as Elise pulled away and rejoined the rest of our group, the picture of innocence. I remained frozen in place, her poisonous words echoing through me. Was she capable of following through on such a vile threat? Of harming me to get me out of their lives? I shuddered, wrapping my arms tightly around myself. This family vacation needed to end soon, before Elise's malice escalated beyond repair. The morning after Elise's chilling threat on the hiking trail, I found myself unable to look her in the eye over our hotel breakfast. She, in turn, seemed to bask in the tension, chattering away to Derek as if nothing was amiss. Harold must have sensed my unease. As our food arrived, he leaned in close with a concerned expression. Everything all right, dear? You seem even more on edge than usual. I forced a tight smile. I'm fine, Dad. Just tired of the bickering, that's all. Before he could pry further, a commotion arose near the entrance to the dining room. Elise suddenly shrieked, leaping up from her chair. You! What are you doing here? She screeched, eyes wild with panic. We all turned to see a 30-ish man in a tattered jacket standing sheepishly near the hostess station. He scanned the room until his eyes landed on Elise. Elise? I didn't know you'd be here. He trailed off as Derek rose to his feet and moved protectively toward his wife. Who is this Elise? Derek demanded, glaring at the disheveled stranger. Elise seemed to gather herself, smoothing her hair in a show of composure. "Just an ex-boyfriend with a restraining order," she said coldly. "The staff needs to call security immediately." The man's eyes widened. "No, wait, Elise, please, I only came to talk." "Talk about what?" Derek roared. "About how you're stalking my wife, violating a court order?" Several other diners now watched the scene with rapt attention. Elise clutched Derek's arm, crocodile tears welling up. "Please, get him away from me. I'm terrified." Security guards hurried over and began to escort the flustered ex-boyfriend out, as he protested they had it all wrong. I watched on in stunned silence, unsure what to make of the outburst. Elise sniffled dramatically and buried her face in Derek's chest. "I'm so sorry you all had to witness that. When will he just let me move on with my life?" Harold reached out to pat her hand. There, dear. The important thing is you're safe." But as I regarded Elise clinging to Derek's protective embrace, something in her demeanor didn't seem to ring true. Had that whole scene been a performance? A ploy to elicit pity and gain our sympathies? A dark thought crept into my mind. Perhaps the strange appearance of her ex was not as accidental as she claimed. Perhaps she had contrived the whole confrontation, knowing it would shock us and make her look like the wounded party, further alienating her from any suspicions or blame. In that moment, a cold chill ran down my spine. How much more was Elise capable of to get her way? What actions was she willing to take to secure our trust and affection? I decided then that I couldn't stay another night under the same roof as her. As staged as the morning's drama seemed, one thing had become abundantly clear. Elise was a manipulative, dangerous woman who would stop at nothing to fracture our family bonds for her own selfish gain. As Harold, Derek, and Elise continued to make a fuss over the security response, I rose quietly from my chair and stepped out into the crisp morning air. I needed to find a way to end this vacation immediately, before Elise's malice spun further out of control. After Elise's alarming confrontation with her supposed ex-boyfriend at breakfast, I wasted no time in searching her out alone. I found her in the hotel lobby, feigning distress as she recounted the incident to the concerned concierge. "Elise," I interrupted sharply. "A word?" She glanced up at me with disdain. "Can't you see I'm a bit occupied here? Why don't you run along and let the adults handle this?" Ignoring her jab, I pressed on. "We need to talk. Now." Elise rolled her eyes but begrudgingly excused herself to follow me outside onto the lodge's scenic back patio. A few other guests lounged nearby, sipping coffee and taking in the mountain vistas. "Well?" Elise snapped once we were out of earshot. "What's so urgent that you had to drag me away?" "I know that whole scene with your ex-boyfriend this morning was a setup," I said bluntly. "I'm not sure how or why, but you orchestrated that entire confrontation." Elise's features froze into an icy mask. "How dare you accuse me of such a thing? That was terribly traumatic for me." "Was it, though?" I pressed. "Because I didn't see any real fear or surprise in your eyes when that man appeared. If anything, you seemed almost prepared for it to happen." A muscle twitched in her jaw. "You've completely lost your mind, Marla. I'm a victim here, can't you see that?" "No, I don't see that," I said evenly. "What I see is you manipulating the situation and all of us to make yourself look like the poor, wounded wife in need of sympathy and protection, just like you always do." Elise's composure shattered. "You miserable wench," she hissed, moving in close with bared teeth. "Of course you'd never understand what it's like to be vulnerable as a woman. You're nothing but a jealous, pathetic old maid." I refused to back down. "Believe me, Elise, I understand exactly who and what you are. The time for your lies and deceptions is over." She let out a derisive laugh. "And just what do you plan to do about it? Turn my own husband against me with your wild, paranoid delusions?" "If that's what it takes," I said, my voice laced with steel. "Your hold over this family ends here." With that, I spun on my heel and marched back inside, leaving Elise to seethe alone in the fresh mountain air. I knew I needed to act fast before she could manipulate the situation even further. I tracked down Harold first, finding him back in the lobby looking confused and troubled. I took his arm firmly but gently. "Dad, we need to leave. Now." His brow furrowed. "But dear, what about the rest of our stay? We haven't even been here 2 days." "Trust me, we cannot stay another night under the same roof as Elise," I said, keeping my voice low. I'll explain everything once we're far away from here. But we have to go. Harold hesitated for a moment, then seemed to read the desperation in my eyes. He relented with a resigned sigh. All right, I'll go let Derek know we're checking out early. As he shuffled off to find his son-in-law, I moved to the front desk to arrange a hasty checkout. Within half an hour, our bags were loaded and we were speeding away down the winding mountain roads, leaving Elise and her web of deceit behind. The rage and disbelief on her face as we drove off without explanation was an image I would not soon forget. Finally, the tables had turned, and a small piece of my long-simmering revenge had been satisfied. As we raced homeward through the spectacular alpine scenery, a calmness settled over me. For once, standing up to Elise's malice had felt like a victory. But I knew this battle was far from over. She would not take our abrupt departure lightly. In the days to come, I was certain Elise would retaliate in full force, and I needed to be prepared to unravel her manipulations completely, no matter how extreme the measures. As predicted, Elise's wrath over our abrupt departure from the family vacation was swift and unrelenting. No sooner had we returned home than Derek showed up at our doorstep, his expression grim. "We need to talk," he stated flatly as I ushered him inside. Harold peered out from the living room, confused. "Derek, what's going on, son?" "I've just come from an argument with Elise," Derek said, running a hand through his hair. "She's absolutely beside herself, insisting you two abandoned her in the mountains without any explanation." He fixed me with an accusatory glare. "She said something about you making wild accusations against her, claiming you conspired to have her embarrassed in front of everyone." I refused to be cowed. "Derek, I know this is going to sound extreme, but I promise it's the truth. Your wife orchestrated that entire confrontation with her so-called ex-boyfriend at breakfast." Derek's eyes narrowed. "Don't be ridiculous. Why on earth would Elise manufacture something so upsetting?" "To manipulate us all into sympathizing with her, playing the victim," I pressed on. "She knew that if we saw her being abused or mistreated, it would gain our trust and make her seem more vulnerable." Derek opened his mouth as if to protest, but I held up a hand to stop him. "I know how it sounds, but please, hear me out. Look at her behavior. Really look at it. She tells a constant stream of lies and spins everything to make herself the center of attention, the wronged party. She practically thrives on your pity." I saw a glimmer of doubt spark in Derek's eyes as I laid it all out. "I can't prove what she did or how, but I know it in my gut. Elise engineered that scene with her ex to secure your loyalty and affection. She's been manipulating our entire family this whole time." Shaking his head slowly, Derek moved to sink into the nearest armchair, looking utterly defeated. "My God, what if you're right?" Harold sat down beside him, reaching out to grasp his shoulder. "Derek, I know my daughter may sound paranoid, but I've seen how Elise has treated her over the years. Perhaps it's time to consider the possibility that—" He was interrupted by the shrill ringing of the doorbell. I froze mid-sentence as Derek looked up, his face pale. "That'll be her. She's come for an explanation." As he moved to answer the door, I grabbed his arm fiercely. "No, don't let her in until you've heard the whole truth." He met my gaze, fear and uncertainty etched into his features. Then, with a curt nod, he pushed past me toward the foyer. "Go away, Elise," he bellowed through the closed door. "We're not having this discussion through a door." "Open up this instant, Derek." Elise's shrill voice reached my ears, dripping with venom. "You can't simply leave me alone up there with no way back. What were you thinking, abandoning me like that?" "We're not discussing this now," Derek replied, leaning against the door as if to physically barricade her out. "Go home and cool off. We'll talk when you're not hysterical." There was a beat of silence, then the most blood-curdling scream of rage erupted from the other side of the threshold. Elise unleashed a torrent of profanity and accusations, banging her fists against the heavy wooden door. It took all my resolve not to cower back as her wrath blasted through the hallway. Derek remained grim-faced and steadfast, waiting her out. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard her high heels storming off, accompanied by a fresh volley of curses. Derek sagged against the door, his face crumpled with despair. Harold reached out to steady him. "Now, son? Now you know the truth." I watched as Derek broke down, realization washing over him in waves. I moved to his side, enveloping him in a tight embrace as great heaving sobs racked his body. Elise's grip was broken, and the path to her ultimate downfall had been laid bare. In that moment, I felt an odd sense of resolution. My long quest for vengeance against the woman who had tormented me and poisoned our family had taken a dark, ugly turn. But finally, after so many years, justice was being served. As Harold joined us with tears in his eyes, I wondered how much further the ripples of retribution would spread before the storm finally passed. Elise's reckoning was only just beginning. In the weeks following Elise's explosive outburst on our doorstep, a palpable shift occurred within our family dynamics. Derek, finally forced to confront the ugly truth about his wife's manipulations, took decisive action. "I'm filing for divorce," he informed Harold and me one evening over a quiet dinner. "I can no longer ignore or excuse her vile behavior." Harold reached across the table to grasp his hand. "I'm so sorry it has come to this, son, but you have our full support." I simply nodded, a lump forming in my throat. While a dark part of me felt vindicated, the predominant emotion was a deep sorrow for Derek's pain. Elise didn't go quietly, of course. She stormed the house one final time, unleashing a torrent of accusations and threats. But this time, Derek stood firm. "Get out," he stated flatly. "The lawyers will handle the asset division, but I want you gone from my life immediately." Sputtering with outrage, Elise turned her vitriol on me. "This is all you're doing, you conniving bitch. You filled his head with lies to turn him against me." I refused to rise to her bait. "No one turned Derek against you but yourself, with your constant cruelty and deception. Now leave, and don't come back." As the divorce proceedings dragged on over the following months, Elise grew increasingly unhinged. She showed up to Derek's office shrieking about him destroying her life. She harassed Harold with late-night drunken voicemails pleading for his intervention. But through it all, we remained a united front, utterly unmoved by her desperate machinations. At long last, the divorce was finalized. Elise retained a sizable portion of Derek's assets, but had lost any remaining influence over our lives. After one last attempt at reconciliation was rebuffed, she finally disappeared, leaving only a scorched path of bitterness in her wake. A profound calmness settled over our home in the aftermath. Derek slowly regained his strength and self-assurance without Elise's constant belittling presence. Harold's health improved notably with the reduction of stress, and I found myself able to breathe fully for the first time in years. The ever-present shadow of Elise's malice finally lifted. One evening over a lively game of cards, Derek turned to me with an expression of utmost sincerity. "Marla, I owe you an immense apology for allowing Elise to treat you so abhorrently for all these years," he said, shame flickering in his eyes. "If it weren't for your bravery in exposing her manipulation and standing up to her, who knows how much longer I would have remained blind." I reached out to grasp his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "You were deceived by someone you loved and trusted. I hold no ill will toward you, Derek." He managed a weak smile. "You've always been the strong one, just like Dad says, so selfless, caring for him as you do, despite Elise's years of abuse. I cannot even begin to make amends, but I want you to know how deeply I respect and admire you." Harold nodded in solemn agreement. "Your mother would be extremely proud of the woman you've become, dear." I felt tears prick my eyes, overcome with emotion at their words. So many years of hurt and anger seemed to melt away in that moment as our family bonds were reformed, stronger than ever before. In the days that followed, Derek departed to travel abroad while he reassessed his life and career. Harold and I fell into a renewed closeness in his absence, our relationship no longer clouded by Elise's toxic presence. So focused on repairing what she had fractured, we scarcely noticed when the dark specter of her name faded entirely from our conversations. It was over a relaxing cup of tea one afternoon that Harold brought up an idea that would change the course of the next chapter of our lives. "You know, with Derek's support, we could likely afford to purchase and renovate that vacant storefront downtown," he mused. "Turn it into a proper community center for all the local families in need." I felt a spark of inspiration ignite within me. "Dad, that's a wonderful idea. We could offer programs, classes, counseling services. It could become a real pillar in our town." He grasped my hand, his eyes alight. "And just think, We'd get to build it together, side by side, a chance to create something positive out of all that ugliness. I squeezed his hand firmly, feeling a profound sense of purpose wash over me. Our path forward was clear, to uplift and support others in whatever form we could. The past would not define us. Only our resilient spirits and deep familial love would remain to guide us into a bright, new future.